Hey there, I'm Scott Bowe. I'm a Senior Cloud Solutions Architect with VMware, and I am also vCDX number 275 and a vExpert. Today, we are going to be talking about the power of vROPS and vRA together and how you can too have 99 problems, but not have snapshots as one of them. So today, we're going to talk about what we're going to accomplish today. We're going to talk about the problem that we're going to solve, the solution to our problem, and then we're going to go through a live demo of the solution in action and how you can build it. So what is our problem that we are trying to solve from a business perspective? So let's say we work at an organization and we have a hypothetical policy that says we need to have snapshots and they need to exist for no more than 72 hours because snapshots aren't backups. And we don't want to incur the risk that having a long-running snapshot has from a performance and a business perspective. Also, we want to make sure that we allow users to have an exception so that they can have a snapshot exist for up to 14 days if the business needs it. And then we're going to add in an added requirement to our problem that we need to have a really fast turnaround on our service requests when a request for a snapshots come in. And so that we need to get that snapshot fulfilled within 2 hours. So that's the business problem. So what is the technical problem? Well, there's two aspects of it. The first is you could end up with this. And let's pretend for that moment that we're not also living with a really old vSphere version, but having a virtual machine with a chain of snapshots like this is not going to be good for a virtual machine's reliability perspective. If you're running down in this lower snapshot and here, if any of these previous parent snapshots, something happens to them, your virtual machine is going to be toast and corrupted. So aside from a resiliency and reliability perspective, we have a performance perspective to worry about. So every time a disk IO happens on a snapshot, the virtual machine needs to traverse and process the whole snapshot chain to understand where's the block that I need to update? What's the most current version of this block that I need to read? And that results in performance problems because you're introducing more and more read-IO operations into every operation. I one time had a virtual machine that I observed having 100% co-stop. And being the good vSphere admin that I was, I simply vMotioned that virtual machine to a host by itself because obviously it was having some CPU constraint on the host that it was. And I was horrified to find that when I moved the virtual machine to a new host by itself, the co-stop and the performance of it didn't change. As I dug into the problem, I discovered a scenario like we see on the screen here. Super large snapshot, many snapshots involved in it, so that it was a huge burden on the hypervisor to perform all of those IOs. So the co-stop wasn't the result of CPU contention. It was the result of the hypervisor not scheduling the virtual machine so that it could do those disk IOs. So that's the technical problem that we're trying to avoid. So let's talk about the solution and the framework that we're going to build today. So we're going to build a framework that meets all of our business requirements and mitigates our technical problems. So the framework that we're going to have is we're going to have our VMware environment, and we're going to have vRealize operations involved, vRealize Orchestrator, and vRealize automation. And Orchestrator is going to kind of be the piece that performs the work, while vRealize operations is going to monitor for it. So what's going to happen is that our user is going to submit a request through vRA to take a snapshot of a virtual machine. vRA is going to execute a VRO workflow to go and take the snapshot in vCenter. And if the user requests that exception for that 14 days, it's going to apply a specific tag to the virtual machine. And then from there, vRealize operations is going to monitor our infrastructure, looking for virtual machines that violate our policy of 3 days or 14 days. When it finds that violation, it's going to generate an alert. And that alert is going to trigger a workflow to execute, which is then going to go out and clean up our snapshot, and then vROPS will subsequently be able to resolve its alarm. So that's the framework that we're going to build. So let's talk about pieces that we'll use from a technology perspective to build this solution. So the first thing that we're going to be leveraging is vSphere tags. So by applying vSphere tags to our virtual machines, we're going to be able to inform vROPS of what are the machines that need to have the standard policy versus the machines that need to have the custom policy. So then within vROPS, we're going to leverage a large number of constructs. We're going to use custom groups. So a custom group is an organizational construct in vROPS that we can use to apply different monitoring policies. So vROPS is going to take our custom group and put virtual machines in it that have that exception tag. Then based on the exception tag, vROPS is going to apply a different monitoring policy. So that alarm doesn't trigger until 14 days as opposed to 3 days. And then we're going to use symptoms to define the thresholds of 3 days or 14 days for when a snapshot is a problem. And then an alert is going to trigger when those symptoms that we define are true. And then we're going to create an action, which ties back to a vRealize Orchestrator workflow that is going to be associated with an alert and a recommendation to automatically remediate the problem. We're going to leverage vRealize Orchestrator to do some workflows for automated remediation and cleaning up our snapshots. And then also the workflows are going to provide the functionality that takes the self-service snapshot and applies the exception when it's requested. And finally, vRealize automation is going to be our tool where the user comes in and is able to request a snapshot when they need it. So having discussed the solution, the problem, and the pieces of the solution, let's move on to a demo environment to take a look and see what this looks like in practice. So just switching to my VDI screen here. So here we are in vRealize operations now. So we have a couple of tabs open here that I'm going to walk through. First, we have vRealize operations up that we're going to be doing the majority of the work in. We have a vRealize automation tab open where we're going to be doing some work. And then we have a vCenter environment open. So what we're going to do is walk through those pieces of our solution. So in our vCenter environment, we have the tag that we talked about. So when we go to look at our tags and custom attributes, we have a tag category here called monitoring exception. And so this is a tag category that was created by Orchestrator automatically when we requested a snapshot. And there is a specific tag associated with that category called snapshot lifetime exception. And if we sort by this, we can see that right here we have snapshot lifetime. So when we apply this tag to a virtual machine, vROPS will process that and apply a different policy to it. So let's go look at vROPS. So in vROPS, the first thing that we need to build is a custom group. So we can go to custom groups by going to environment and go into the custom groups section. And we have a group type here called monitoring exceptions. And within that, we have one called snapshot lifetime exception. So aside from the fact that we currently have 4 machines with this in this group, we're mostly interested in the criteria for how this group is defined. So we are defining this group as belonging to, as having members virtual machines that have the property of a vSphere tag that contains snapshot lifetime exception. So what that means is at the time this group is created, any virtual machine that has that tag will be a member of this group. And we want this to apply dynamically. So we're going to make sure that this checkbox for keeping the group membership up to date is checked. So when vROPS is monitoring our infrastructure, it's going to continually look for new members of this group and members that need to go away to keep this group up to date. And then the last thing we want to look at here is we're going to apply a different policy from our standard default policy to this, our snapshot lifetime policy. So we'll talk about that in a little bit. So that's our group. So Now that we have the group, let's go talk about that policy that we just hinted at. So if we go to administration and look at our policies, we have our default policy here that's applied to everything by default. Then we have two child policies. So much like Active Directory group policy, there is inheritance at play here. So if we look at our default policy and look at our alerts and symptoms that are defined, we can have a custom alert called snapshot. Custom virtual machine is running on snapshot for more than 3 days. And we can see that this alert is enabled and it is set to be automated. So when we go and look at this alert in a few minutes, what this means is that vROPS will monitor for this. And when it finds this alert to have occurred, it will automatically execute the associated action with it. So this is our default policy that applies to everything except for our exceptions. So now let's go look at our exception policy. And what we can see is we have two values that are different from our parent policy. One is we have our policy for our 3 days. And here we have that set to disabled for being alerted on, and the automation is also disabled. But what we've done is enabled a similar policy for 14 days. So what this is enabling vROPS to do is to look at a machine, and instead of taking action after 3 days, it takes action after 14 days. So that's how we inform and tell vROPS to do things differently and do things automatedly. So now how do we create this alert that we talked about? So we've talked about the custom groups, the monitoring policies. Now we have all those other things, the alerts, the symptoms, the actions, and the recommendations. So let's go to the alerts section of vROPS. So the first thing we're going to look at is the actions. So vROPS out of the box has a number of actions associated with it based on management packs that are installed. And even though it's not explicitly there, there is a connection for the vCenter adapter, a management pack effectively. And what this does is it includes actions for doing things like deleting an idle virtual machine, deleting unused snapshots. But what you can see is we also have an adapter for vRealize Orchestrator that gives us access to some workflows like an auto scale in, scale out. There's also a workflow here that is remove all virtual machine snapshots. So if we find it by filtering, we'll have a workflow that exists inside of Orchestrator that removes all the snapshots from a virtual machine. So how do we leverage this? Well, we do that by creating a recommendation. So we have a recommendation here that we call do not use snapshots for more than 72 hours. So if we edit this and look at it, we can see that there's some text description here. So this is really useful for you when you create an alert and you want to provide instructions for someone to perform. You can provide detailed step-by-step instructions. You can provide an external web link, or what you can do, what we're doing in this case, tell it, here is an action to perform. So we're telling it, go to the vRealize Orchestrator adapter and execute this workflow. So now we have created that action, that script that we've created. We've created a recommendation associated with it. Now what we're going to do is we're define a symptom. And a symptom is a criteria that vROPS uses to indicate health and criticality. So we have two symptoms here that are defined as a virtual machine has a snapshot for more than 3 days, and a virtual machine has a snapshot for more than 14 days. So we need one symptom for each of our two criteria that we're going to be monitoring for. And then the last piece that we have is our alert. And our alert ties everything together. So if we edit this alert, and we're editing the one for 3 days, we define our alert and the associated object. We define the symptom of the alert. We're saying actually that we not only are we looking for it to be older than 3 days, we're saying that it needs to be bigger than a gig. And then we have our recommendation. So you can add other alerts, but in terms of our recommendation, we're associating it with one or more recommendations. And in this case, we're saying this recommendation should be our remove snapshots recommendation that we looked at. And then the next thing that we do is we can define the policy that this alert applies to. So in this case, we're saying it needs to apply to the default policy and our auto scale policy, but not our exception policy. And then finally, you can define notification rules so that alerts happen. No email notifications, Slack notifications, ServiceNow tickets happen when this alert is triggered. And so we have an alert for each of our two scenarios that we want to do. So that's the vROPS portion of it. Now let's go over to VRA and look at the VRA and the Orchestrator section. So if we go to Orchestrator, there's two things that we're going to look at in Orchestrator, and they're both workflows. One of them is our a built-in workflow called remove all snapshots. So if we filter on this, we'll have a workflow for remove all snapshots. That's simply a built-in Orchestrator workflow to go find a virtual machine that's specified and then remove the snapshots from it. So it's very handy that we have this built-in workflow for this cleanup work. Saves us a lot of time. The other workflow that we have that we'll be using is a workflow that lets users take snapshots. And so what we're doing is we have a workflow that we are going to, in a second, show how we publish it into VRA. It is prompting a user to provide a Boolean for should this have an exception, the name of the virtual machine, and then some details about the snapshot. And then it has a decision tree. If we are giving a true Boolean that there is an exception, we need to go add an exception tag to the virtual machine, which calls a child workflow that goes to the VM and tags it and gives it that tag that we saw in vCenter. And then after that, or if the decision is that there isn't an exception required, we go and create the snapshot. And this is, again, using a custom workflow. This one we had to build ourselves, but we'll give you the code for it. So that's the Orchestrator piece. We have these two workflows. So now what does this look like from an end user consumption perspective? So we will go to Cloud Assembly, and we can't, or not Cloud Assembly, we'll go to Service Broker, and we will go and take a snapshot. But before we take the snapshot, let's go tweak our policy so that we can see this in action, our cleanup in action. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go look at a dashboard, and I'm going to show you that we have some virtual machines in one of our environment with some really large snapshots. So we've got my 3 log insight machines that's got some big snapshots, but they're not very old. So we're going to go to our alerts, and we're going to go to our alert definition, and we're going to change this alert from meeting all of our criteria of both size and age. And we're going to say this should happen if any of these are true. And we're going to click update. And so we'll come back and check on that after we go check out the rest of the VRA portion. So now in Service Broker, we have a catalog item here called Create Snapshot in the Exception Framework. So this matches back to that VRO workflow that we have. So if I open this up, you'll see that I'm prompted to provide a name around this. So we'll give it just a generic name. And we're going to say, I want there to be an exception. And we are going to put in a name, a snapshot description, and then we can search for our VM. So I don't have to know the VM, but I can search for it. So we'll go find my Jenkins machine. Start to type and search, and there it is. So we're going to take a snapshot of my Jenkins machine. We're going to tell it, apply a special tag to it to get an exception, and we're going to click submit. So now while that's happening, I have to go to vCenter, and we're going to actually open up a new tab here because I need to log into a different vCenter for that one. And so here you can see there's my Jenkins machine with its snapshot being taken. So what we're going to do now is while that's happening, we're going to go check out my log insight machines and see what their situation is. So they've got the snapshot that I took yesterday. So let's go back to vROPS and to our alerts and see if we have any alerts that triggered. So we haven't had any happen yet today, which will take a collection cycle. But what we can do is if we filter on this, we can see that I got a bunch of alerts on these last night, and that, hey, here is a snapshot, and vROPS went and automatically resolved it. And you can see that it resolved it because we have the remove all snapshots button here grayed out. And you can see again, I have the same symptom. So now what we can do is wait a minute for vROPS to determine that this needs to happen. And we'll refresh this. So again, we're waiting on the vROPS collection cycle for it to determine that there is an alarm that occurred. The other cool thing that you can do with these alerts and notifications is, like you can see, and you have a lot of filtering here that you can do. So you can filter them based on time, definition, the criticality, the scope. There's a lot of useful stuff here. There we go. A couple new alerts. So there are alerts for our 3 log insight machines. And if we check out what's happening, we can go into it. We have our button lit up. And if we go over to vCenter, we should see that our 3 alerts, our 3 remediation tasks are happening. So everything worked exactly as expected. Took a minute or 2 longer than is good for live situations, but we're good. So with that, that concludes the demo, and I'm going to switch back to PowerPoint and show you where you can get an example and a walkthrough of how to build this on your own. So in closing, you can go to GitHub and my repository, Centinea, and you can get all the workflows that you need for this, definitions for the alerts, and a lot of other cool vROPS and VRA content. And in addition, you can go to my blog, cloudsandunicorns.com, and I have a write-up on this about how exactly you can do this from every piece of it, from establishing the VRO connection to vROPS, the VRO to VRA connection, and then all the code to create the alerts and workflows so that you can too, implement a framework to automatically remediate your snapshots using VRA and VRO and vROPS. Thank you.